Thanks very much, Mariele, and congratulations. I think another round of applause for doing that the first time in English. Very impressive. Well, we have a Greek economist sandwich between two Brazilians. Now's your chance to ask questions, and I hope someone's going to help me out here. Fiona, if you could just say who you are and
Yep,
where you're from.
for sure. Thank you, Phillip. Fiona Simpson. I'm a farmer from northwestern New South Wales where we grow cattle and cropping. Unfortunately, not 3 crops a year like in Brazil, but maybe we can always hope for something. And I'm also the president of New South Wales Farmers who represent grassroots farmers across New South Wales. My question is primarily, I think, for Berry, though Tassos might like to comment as well. And I have to say just in a comment that I think it's one of the messages that I will be taking back to my members, that they have long complained about the regulatory burden that they face and how it's impacting them on the farm, at the farm gate, and how they actually run their businesses. And it's been very heartening consistently now through numbers of speakers that I've heard over the last day or so, to hear that regulatory burden is being directly linked to productivity and to competitiveness factors. So I think that they will really welcome that. But my question is actually mostly about succession planning. And I'm a great believer in not having to reinvent the wheel. And so, Berry, I wondered, in your global business and in your global dealings and in what sound like those wonderful farmers' masterclasses, how do other people in the world deal with the problem? Is it a problem for countries and people and farmers across the world? Is the solution somewhere around where Tassos was talking about and paying farmers for some of the environmental outcomes that we achieve on a daily basis? Or is it, in fact, looking at, and this is my own view at the moment, looking at different business models where potentially equity partners might take a share in the risks and the returns, unlike the traditional leasing share farming models. So I just wondered what your experience shows and comment on that in respect of where we should be heading or looking to model or explore in Australia. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question, Fiona. Let me start doing maybe something completely different, saying we now as Rabobank have a couple of decades of experience at financing farms. And if you look at the farms that are most profitable, are actually the large family farms. It looks like that treating farming as a generational, let's say, enterprise is the one that obtains actually better returns. I'm not going to get into details, but on average, you could say that a generational farm, if I may say so, has 10% more return than a non-generational farm. So on the long term, that's very important. And the reason why I'm saying this is that succession planning only has reasons to exist if we actually show to the next generation that they are going to become rich. So why would you stay on farm if you think you're going to, and that's what I think your slide showed very much, that there was a period when I grew up, for instance, in the 70s and the 80s, where farming was very tough. And actually saw my parents having a lot of trouble to make means every day. So I said, I'm not going to do this. So I went to the big city and I became a rural banker. But the reality is that if I look at my own situation, actually my parents didn't show to me that I could actually make a good living out of it. And I think this has to be shown nowadays that this has changed. That actually farming is very exciting. Farming is very technologically advanced. I think there are very few industries right now that are so complex as farming, because you're not only dealing with technology, you're dealing with weather, you're dealing with price, risk management, managing your employees, and looking at the future, looking at global markets. There are very few businesses nowadays that are so complex. So what I see is that, we have, as new entrepreneurs for the future of succession, have to show that farming is actually a great business. And and if schemes or different schemes, I think that the only schemes that work are the schemes that have real farmers involved. All the institutional schemes at the long run don't work.
Thanks, Barry. We'll take a question at microphone number 3 and then number 5.
Thank you. I'm Ivan Ivanisevic from Argentina, and I'd like to make a question to Mr. Haniotis concerning the European Union agricultural policy. It seems that the European Union has not incorporated major sustainable agricultural production technologies such as no-till technologies. Given that Mr. Marttin pointed out that the main challenge today is to produce more with less, I wonder if the European Union is going to revise its policies with regard both to no-till and GMOs, which are closely linked, in order to make the most out of the little resources we have. Thank you.
This is on, okay. You raise two things at the same time. First of all, it's not true that we have not moved into no-till. We have moved into no-till, and it's not necessarily that you do it only where you have GMOs. But you raise an issue that is linked to the whole logic by which policy is driven in the EU, which is mainly demand-driven and not supply-driven. The type of concerns that determine your policy choices, your technological choices, regulatory choices, are ones that reflect a shifting preference that citizens in Europe have that reflects the structural characteristics of agriculture. Europe is much more densely populated than other parts of the world. Food is also a cultural issue, and the structure of agriculture is completely different if you look at some of the member states like the Netherlands, Denmark, or the UK, with a very low percentage of population is in agriculture, or some of the newer member states where it's a much higher percentages. So what you have to deal is with a process of structural adjustment that naturally takes much more time. What also people, I believe, tend to forget when they see Europe from the outside, and I've seen it from both sides, is that most of the discussions about why the EU is doing this or not the other are coming from the so-called New World. Now, the characteristic of the New World is that land, for historical reasons, moved into agriculture with a completely different price level than what it moved in Europe. And that you have it reflected in the structures of what we have. So basically, it's not that we don't want to move in this direction. We're moving into a direction that does look into sustainability, and we have had pretty concrete evidence. If you look at the degree of input use in European agriculture has gone down dramatically since the 90s without a significant impact on yields. In fact, our yields are very high. But clearly, we haven't moved in the direction that others would have liked, or even some of us would have liked in terms of this type of technologies. But that reflects a much more complex situation.
Thanks, Tassos. We'll have to make this the last question because I'm conscious that I'm cutting into the morning tea time and time for networking, but please, in the centre.
Stephen Watkins from the UK, a Nuffield scholar, and there are some 27 of us here from Europe. So if anybody will wish to discuss later, we have a very distinctive tie, which is green with a red ball on a bicycle, and I'm sure can fill you in. I noted that earlier your minister actually quoted that the road construction could not take place until the environmental study had taken place. These are very expensive. Tassos, you have indicated that you have provided a carrot and a stick. Unfortunately, the carrot is already decaying because that's a fixed price. So in order for me to enter some of these environmental schemes, it's just not a practical exercise. I fully understand the need of the environment, but do you, all three of you, think that really we are paying too much attention to the environmentalists and not enough to actual production?
Tassos, do you?
Well, the way I look at it is that what we should not allow is unsustainable practices. I think that's the right way, and I think when you build a road, you have to do it the proper way. You have to take all considerations. But more importantly, if we look at things that happen nowadays, even things that have nothing to do with infrastructure, but on-farm things that happen today, the question is how sustainable it is. So as I said, I have a lot of experience in other countries. If you go to the very unsustainable practice of washing your tractor when you come back from the field, that is already actually much more damaging than building a road, because you wash your tractor full of pesticides and weeds, and you put it on a liquid manner, and you let it flow into the water streams. So I think that rather focusing there, I think today we should be focusing actually to be much more stricter on unsustainable practices. Feeding water to crops in places that use too much water, while you could have much more, let's say, food production per liter of water, I think that's also sustainable practice. So I think today we should much more looking at what are unsustainable practices.
Tassos.
I believe that it's one thing to pay attention to environmentalists, which are not one group, by the way. Another thing to pay attention to the environment. And only, if I showed the graph that we saw always in the beginning, to focus on the energy link of agriculture and how energy intensive agriculture is, this is one more reason why we have to pay a very close attention to what is happening in the environment. Now, do we pay this attention in the best possible way? Part of the problems we face in agriculture are the result of the lower investment in research, public and private, and especially public, of the last 20 years or so, and we see the results today. And that's why it's extremely important to focus on increasing the amount of research. That's one of the areas that you clearly see an increase in the European Union, and the budget doubles for agricultural research for the next 7 years. But you also have to ask the right questions. And to ask the right questions, you have to go and see the different situations that exist in different parts of the world, because the answer is not necessarily going to be the same across the world. But I think also, I'm not sure that institutions generally fail. I believe that there is a need for a common approach between public and the private sector. This is another area where we should not bring artificial conflicts, but cooperate together. Of course, you would expect from a public official to say that, but I also honestly believe that this is necessary.
Thanks very much, Barry and Tassos. I started this session quite depressed with Barry's 4 times issue of doubling production with half the resources. I was a little bit encouraged by Tassos and the fact that the European Union is making a slow and deliberate move away from distorting support and subsidies for farmers. And then I was tremendously encouraged by Mariele's the capacity in Brazil. I think Brazil alone should be able to solve the problem that Barry posed. And then I finished depressed because I thought it's going to be very hard for us to compete with Brazil. But can I thank you all for your participation, your patience in letting me run you over time. Can I thank the sponsors for this session, Rabobank, for their contribution, helping us be able to put this on. And finally, can I ask you to join me in thanking our 3 speakers, Barry, Tassos and Mariele.